Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. On Friday, the viewer question was about theme parks and if they're really that important to the film business. And my answer was yes. Now I'm going to give you a quick recap of my answer on Friday because it's going to come into play with today's first movie news story. Now the example I gave on Friday was Disney because they're a pioneer. Literally Disney invented the modern theme park and continued this day to be a frontrunner not just in the theme park business but the movie business. So I noted that in the 2013 fiscal year, Disney brought in worldwide from its theme parks $14 billion in revenue. And out of that $14 billion, they were able to pocket $6 billion in profits. Now in comparison, over in their film division, Disney made headlines last year when they passed the $4 billion mark at the worldwide box office. But that is revenue, that's not profit. So you can see that Disney was able to pocket more money from their theme parks than they brought in before they had to pay off their expenses in the film division. So those numbers are amazing, and they just underline how important the theme park business truly is. And the other studios, Universal, I think, has been the only real contender to date with their Universal theme parks with Disney, but other studios are beginning to get into the mix because of these big numbers, and also more franchises exist. They have more properties that are theme park friendly. For instance, I mentioned on Friday that the Hunger Games wants to potentially have a theme park. Warner Brothers, while they had their Six Flags rides, they're involved with those parks. They're trying to, up their game a little bit with the Harry Potter tour in the UK at Leeds Studios, which now Warner Brothers owns. And then, of course, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, which Warner Brothers is doing with Universal, which has been a game changer, particularly in Orlando. And I think they're bringing it also to Los Angeles as well. And has put Disney, I think, for the first time ever, a little bit on the ropes when it comes to the theme park business. But when you have all these big properties getting into the theme park ring, another one is dipping a toe in, and that's The Purge. It was announced over the weekend that The Purge is going to have a touring horror show, which will be basically the Purge experience. But the official title is The Purge Breakout. And I think this plays off of the Halloween experiences that you see that are very popular at places like Six Flags and Universal. I mentioned Universal because they often tie in movies with their horror nights, and I think that they're quite effective. I've been to a few of them, and they are genuinely scary. So The Purge, though, is going to be happening, this tour will be happening as a lead up to the film's release this summer, and again, it's called The Purge Breakout. And the tickets are only $20, and if you'd like to attend, I've put a link below in the video description where you can buy a ticket. The cities it's going to hit, it's going to kick off at the end of this month in Atlanta, then it's going to go to Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Dallas, and Los Angeles. So if you live in or around any of those cities and you're a big Purge fan, I'm about to tell you what you'll get for your $20. Be sure to click below to buy a ticket for this experience. So basically what happens is that you and a bunch of other people who bought a ticket, they're going to do this in groups, find yourselves kidnapped by a quirky person who apparently I think is going to want to do something with you when the Purge begins. You're about 30 minutes out from the Purge when your experience starts. So you have that 30 minutes to work with these strangers in this group, this small group, to solve a series of puzzles to get your freedom. And I would suspect this plays off of the auction scene we see in the trailer, the second trailer for The Purge, where you have these rich people of kidnap, not I was going to say innocents, but most of the people on the streets when the Purge is going on, I wouldn't necessarily say are innocent, but they capture a bunch of them, put them in a room, and then these rich people get to auction off who they get to kill, I'm assuming. But that's basically the setup. So I think they're going to try and repeat that for the Purge Breakout. I'm glad they're doing it 30 minutes before the Purge starts because, that's a really scary scenario that someone might be like, well, if all murder is illegal, and you're like, no, that's just the premise of the movie. You can't do that. And I've expressed many times that I feel that these movies are maybe a little bit irresponsible. I'm not quite sure. They're genuinely terrifying because I think that you could see this happening. With a lot of the hate that you see on the internet, the idea that you could give people, as they say, it's a release, 12 hours where crime is completely and murder are completely legal, is scary. Although some people that are not horror fans that I know have seen this trailer for the Purge Anarchy and said, I think I'm going to actually go and check this one out because I think it speaks so much to a very real phenomenon that's going on in society right now, and that's this pent-up anger and aggression. And I think these films are very well realized and, surprisingly so, tastefully done. So I think that this is a very good idea. If I were involved at all with the Purge franchise, I would agree with this. I'd say let's do it. I think it's a great way to drum up interest for the film. It's kind of basically in the Conjuring spot, which set a very high bar. But I think the Purge is something special. When you see a lot of copycat horror movies, I think the Purge stands out as an original idea. And we're going to talk about original ideas a little bit more going on today in today's episode. The whole episode today is a little bit about the state of the movie business today. But I'm very excited about this. So now we're talking about theme parks and movies. And so I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think this is a good idea for the Purge to do this? Would you be at all interested in going? Will you go? Write your thoughts down below about that. And let's move on to today's second story. The second story is about Cannes. The Cannes Film Festival is going on right now, and it's basically a giant black hole of movie news. Not the biggest headlines are coming out of the festival, with the exception of a few genre films that are there, and perhaps they're there specifically to garner headlines because they're making the most noise. Grace of Monaco made a bit of a media blip on Friday, but of course, like the movie itself, it's really not warranting much attention. And so that wasn't the big headline grabber that Cannes maybe wanted. So they really have brought in the How to Train Your Dragon 2, and that was the big story that came out of that was not only talking about the third film, they had some teases about that, but that I think Bopper's name, the Craig Ferguson character, they revealed that character is actually a gay character, and there's like kind of like a little bit of a nod to that in the film. Just a one-liner, but those now in the know will be able to see it, and maybe it'll be explored more in the third film. I think that's quite a controversial decision, and we'll see how that affects the movie. I think we often talk a lot about wanting to see positive portrayals of gay characters, but this seems a little bit more like a gimmick to me than perhaps what Roland Emmerich had in mind, which I was much more interested in, where he wanted to have a gay character in one of his action movies that just happened to be gay and just, helped to save the world and wasn't there for laughs or as a stereotype. I think that's much more progressive than this kind of a throwaway thing, which seems almost more just to get publicity for the film and maybe stir up the pot a little bit. I hope not to DreamWorks' disadvantage because I'm really rooting for this franchise. And I don't know. It's a difficult subject. I'm getting off topic here. I want to talk about another film coming out of Cannes. But I think that the How to Train Your Dragon, this kind of a thing, is surprisingly gimmicky for a franchise that I feel has not been gimmicky. But I'm curious to how you guys feel about that. But the film that I really want to focus on is The Expendables 3. That made a big splash at Cannes over the weekend, and once again was the film that was getting headlines for the festival. So the first thing I want to ask you is, do you think that it's a good idea for Cannes, arguably the most prestigious film festival in the world, to feature movies like How to Train Your Dragon 2 and The Expendables 3? I mean, these are global players, I guess, to some degree, but I don't really know if they fit with the rest of the festival. At the same time, though, none of the other movies are really bringing in headlines. So what is Cannes to do? I think they have a responsibility to the festival and making sure that it gets in the paper or on the front page of the website, using old school terminology. But anyway, some interesting bits came out of the Expendables 3 press conference, which I thought I'd discuss today. First off, one of the things they made headlines with not only were some of the things they said during their press conference, but they shipped in some tanks from the UK to ride into their press conference. So they had all the Expendables on these giant tanks riding through Cannes, and I think that, that makes for another great visual image, and again, it's getting headlines for the movie. And this also benefits the Expendables 3. They get to be associated with Cannes, great setting, very sophisticated backdrop. I think we've seen some elements of sophistication in the latest trailer with them trying to raise the bar a bit, and that's something that they discussed at the press conference. Of course, they addressed the usual, we're not too old, we still have it in us, etc. And I think they've more than proven that at this point, that they not only have it in them to perform, but also to perform, just not just on screen, but to perform at the box office. So I'm sure they're tired of answering these questions. Although, to some degree, I guess that's the hook of the franchise, so it's not going to go away. But what they also talked about was making the film PG-13. This is the first Expendables movie that will be PG-13, and I think it's to obvious bring in a wider audience. Now, Stallone said the reason that it was done during the press conference, the reason he said they went PG-13 was he put a nice spin on it, and it was to bring in the younger generation, a new generation to these actors' movies, and to expose them to old school action. And so that's the reasoning that Stallone used. But I would say that The Expendables 2 didn't quite perform on par with the first Expendables, and so I think they're wisely so are like, well, if we go PG-13, maybe parents can be like, oh, come see the action heroes of my youth, and they can make it more of a family outing. He did say though that they went very much to the edge of a PG-13 rating. It's almost an R. I think they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, and we'll see if they can. But I think the PG-13 for a franchise that's had a little bit of problems, which isn't holding up as well as one might hope, I think the move to PG-13 is a pretty good one. They also pointed out that they fixed the mix of comedy and drama. Stallone addressed it in the second film, perhaps got a little bit too comedic, and he actually said that it might stem from the fact they just have a little bit too much fun on set. But again, I'd be like, where are the scripts in these situations? I mean, why are you guys deviating from the script? Is this an entire improvised movie? I don't think you can improvise action sequences because I believe they have to be quite choreographed. But anyway, he said that while the first one was a little bit too dramatic and the second one was a little too comedic, the third will be just right. And we'll see if that's the case. I actually liked the second Expendables far more than the first. I might be in the minority with that opinion, but also my expectations were significantly lowered for the second film, which might have also helped as well. And I didn't watch it in the theaters, so it made for a delightful rental. The other thing I want to talk about, though, is that they took a little bit of a pot shot at today's movies. They were reminiscing about how they were really in competition back at the heyday for all these actors, particularly Sylvester Stallone versus Arnold Schwarzenegger. They had a funny anecdote about calling each other up and saying, how many people did you kill today? I killed X number of people. And I thought that was charming. But then Mel Gibson chimed in and said, yes, the competition was really stiff back then, not so much today. Bold words, Gibson, when box office records are being broken again and again. But I think that Gibson's speaking more to the fact that the competition between actors isn't quite what it used to be. When we have discussed as often on this show that the movie star is, not as important or integral to the movie business, the equation of a blockbuster as it used to be. You have very few movie stars today, I guess, and they tend to be older, as I also discussed with my older actors video recently. Your big stars are Downey Jr., Depp, Angelina Jolie, very few young stars. Vin Diesel as well, although he had to, bow out of the 2014 box office competition because of the tragic death of Paul Walker, but, you have an older group of stars. But anyway, I think that the real competition today is between franchises and studios, and that's just as stiff as it's ever been. We're constantly talking about Warner Brothers versus Disney, Fox trying to get in there and to be a competitor, and I think they will with X-Men Days of Future Past this weekend. So I think that Gibson, there's a little bit of an edge there to his comment, and I think that he should have clarified that the competition isn't quite as stiff with actors, but to somehow insinuate that the movies aren't as exciting or making as much money as they did back in the 80s and 90s, I feel is a little off target. Sure, there's a lot of misses, and we're going to get to that in a moment, but still, look at Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That's not only a fantastic film, but I think a very large part a game changer. The Dark Knight, etc. And also Godzilla. I had my problems with Godzilla, but I think Godzilla is going to have an effect on Hollywood overall, which I'll discuss more in Movie Math later today. Now, the third story is Viggo Mortenson. You might have seen this headline. It was a very popular headline over the weekend, that he basically decided to, I guess, to some degree, pull a Katherine Heigl. You might remember back in the day when she said bad things about Knocked Up, the movie that put her on the Hollywood map, and that was the beginning of the end for Katherine Heigl. Now, Viggo Mortenson, of course, his star has dimmed considerably since the Lord of the Rings film, but he decided still, for some reason, to, I guess, try and get back into the headlines, or maybe he just felt nobody would pay attention, but they picked it up, boy. He decided to rag a little bit on Peter Jackson. Now, so I'll tell you what he said first, and then we'll have our discussion topics. There are two ways to look at this. The first is that Viggo Mortensen, so what did he say? So Viggo Mortensen said that while the first Lord of the Rings film was really a good project, and he was so happy to be working with Peter Jackson off of films like Heavenly Creatures, that he thought it was a great opportunity. But then he said, Peter Jackson, like a cat with a shiny thing, I added that in. He didn't use the delightful, colorful metaphor. But Viggo Mortensen said that Peter Jackson just became so enamored with special effects that he lost his way as a storyteller. And he went on to say that the Lord of the Rings got progressively dulled down and special effects focused. And then he said the Hobbit films were that exponentially, that they are almost entirely special effects and the story is lacking, which I would actually disagree with Viggo. I think that while the Hobbit has that problem, Unexpected Journey, I think Desolation of Smaug is really a return to form. I was quite enchanted with that, and I thought it was very well done. But then also, Viggo Mortensen also pointed out that Jackson never went back to small films. He said, I assumed he would always go back. Nobody ever goes back, really, Viggo Mortensen. You're like the only one, and I think a lot of people are scratching their heads as to why you did that. But I want to talk about that in a second as well. But Mortensen pointed out that Peter Jackson made The Lovely Bones, which should have been a small budget film. Mortensen pegged it should have been at around 15, but yet Peter Jackson spent $90 million on it. And of course, that's almost an impossible return that you're setting yourself for. It's almost impossible to make a profit off of that kind of a movie with that kind of a limited demographic that it's going to be able to make its money back, or maybe even, hopefully even break even, which, The Lovely Bones had it was not a box office hit in any way. All right, so there are two ways to look at this. One, was Viggo Mortensen out of line critiquing the man who put him on the Hollywood map? And while Viggo Mortensen might have gone back to small films, he wouldn't be able to make small films today if he wasn't still riding the coattails of his Lord of the Rings performance. So Peter Jackson did a great favor for Mortensen because Mortensen certainly didn't bring anybody into the theater when he was cast. He wasn't a star. And Mortensen is able, as I said, to still work to this day thanks to Peter Jackson putting him in the Lord of the Rings because he's a name. At least he's a recognizable name. But at the same time, so I wonder if that's, maybe he could have been nicer about it. Why pick on Peter Jackson? I don't see any reason to do it. And I just think, just like the Katherine Heigl situation, it makes the person saying the negative comments look worse than the person they're saying them about. But the second thing that I want to address is to some degree Viggo Mortensen correct? I think that story problems have become really a big problem in Hollywood as they have overall become enamored with special effects. And that's driving the box office. I think Peter Jackson did lose his way a little bit with The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, but I think he found his way back. And also, when you look at the Oscar nominations for The Return of the King, how can you critique that movie, with, unapologetically, I guess, with absolutely no room for doubt, just to definitely say that there's a problem with it. But I do think that you see those problems in An Unexpected Journey. And we're seeing them in other places this summer. For instance, summer 2014 is not off to a great start. Captain America kicked it off really well, but we've had 2 disappointments now in just the span of a month. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, script problems. People are very angry with the script. Godzilla, script problems. And you have a case where the special effects are mind-blowingly good. I think nobody can argue that Spider-Man looked amazing, and I think Godzilla in particular was really phenomenally well realized. But yet, you have to muddle through a really poor script. And, to some degree, not great acting from great actors. So it's like, I think that this is a problem that Hollywood's having in general. And I think Viggo Mortensen would have been much safer. Maybe he wouldn't have made the same headlines if he hadn't directed it specifically at Peter Jackson. But I think that Viggo Mortensen would have made a smarter comment if he had directed this problem at the industry at large. And I think he is also right about The Lovely Bones. That should never have been a $90 million production, and I don't know why Peter Jackson should have known better, and the studio behind it, his producers should have all known better. You just can't let filmmakers run wild and crazy. Look at the Wachowskis. They need guidance sometimes. It's rare if you can find a filmmaker who can police themselves, and that's a great person. That's a great talent. But that's why there's movies aren't made by a single person. They're made by a group of people because, at the end of the day, it's supposed to all come together. So, again, I'm curious. With Viggo Mortensen, do you think he was out of line to make the statement in the first place? And 2, do you think, though, that maybe there might be some truth to it after all? And it's worth, thinking about to some degree. All right, so those are today's 3 stories. Let's get to the viewer question, which I think is actually really a particularly good one. Very interesting, very out of left field. It's from Diego Gonzalez. And Diego says, "Hi Grace, smiley face, I have a question. I love science and I also love movies." Multiple O's in that love. I was wondering, is there any job in the business that combines them? I was thinking like someone who oversees scripts to make sure that what they're trying to make can actually happen in real life. Because Diego says, I'm a med student and I hate when movies show inexplicable survivals or unrealistic deaths and those kinds of things. Thanks. Another smiley face. Keep up with the great work. Thank you for your question, Diego. I think it's really great. As I've said before, I love questions about different ways people can work in the movie business that aren't your typical director or actor or screenwriter. But that's going to come into play in just a second, actually, Diego. So anyway, as for your first question about whether or not you could be an advisor, you'll see those people referenced in the credits of a movie as an advisor. You have them for all different professions. Often there's a legal advisor on a film, a military advisor, and there are medical advisors and science advisors. Now, if that's something you'd like to do, this isn't really a job you can apply for. It's not, and it's really not a full-time job. It's really something you could do on the side of your main profession, which would be in whatever you were supposed to be advising on. So if you're interested in being an advisor to movies, Diego, my advice to you would be you need to build a pretty solid career in whatever field you're interested, again, in advising in. And then you can hope, maybe you'll be approached by Hollywood, or perhaps you could, reach out and offer your services to a producer or a director whose work you admire, and say that you'd be, willing to contribute. But you have to prove that you can advise, that you are an expert in the subject matter. You can't just volunteer without that kind of track record to back you up. So that's one thing that you could do, Diego. You could be an advisor, but that's not a full-time job. The other thing you could do is also build your career in the science of your choice, and then you can try and get a project of your own. And there are, that tries to put forth truth and science storytelling. And so you could be the engine for that. And there are a couple ways you could do that. Now, for instance, there's Neil deGrasse Tyson, huge science superstar, perhaps the biggest science superstar today since, Stephen Hawking. And he has the show Cosmos on Fox with Seth MacFarlane producing. And so I think he is a good example of someone who, established himself in a certain field, and then Hollywood picked him up to be a good host. So practice your hosting skills, Diego, and if that's what you're interested in going in, the direction you're interested in going in, and also practicing explaining things and, developing a persona. There's also Bill Nye the Science Guy with his bow tie, his trademark bow tie. You can see him, for instance, not only do you have a television show as well, but he's at the Universe of Energy in Epcot. He's forever in that ride, or at least until they decide to update it. So that's another example. So you could be a host, Diego. You could use your science to be a host. The other thing you could do, though, is you could be a screenwriter, kind of like Michael Crichton or John Grisham. John Grisham used his legal expertise to become a successful writer, and then he was so successful he's able to quit his job as a lawyer and be involved somewhat in the movies that he makes. So you could write novels. You could write a comic. That's something you could do using your science background as kind of the hook. Or you could write screenplays directly and see if you can get them picked up with, again, the selling point is that you are a scientist who's actually an expert in this field that you're writing about. You could also become a producer. You could try and look for science-based properties, see if you can get them off the ground, raise the financing. You really have to be, to some degree, a self-starter. And I guess you have to, and everything I've outlined here, you need to be a self-starter. Unfortunately, there's no position where they're just going to hire you. They're not going to put a help wanted ad for anybody who is a science advisor, I'm afraid. But Diego, I love your passion. Obviously, you are a self-starter. You asked a question here on Beyond the Trailer for Morning Movie News. So just keep up with that. Keep up with your studies, and I think that it would be great if you could contribute to movies. And I agree, they could use some help sometimes with the realism of their movies. Why don't you call up Ridley Scott and talk about Prometheus? Maybe Prometheus 2, because that ridiculous machine that can only work on men, isn't programmed to do science, medical, health things on women, was absolutely ridiculous. Why a machine would be gender specific, I have no idea. All right, so Diego, thank you so much for your question. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's 3 movie stories, the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.